This is our online training portal for the compliance. The 8300 form videos are in part 5. And what I'm going to do is play these 3 videos for you here. So the first 2 are going to go through the requirements of the 8300 form. And then the third one focuses specifically on the notification letter for the customer. And I will be right back in just a moment. All right, so here we are at the IRS Form 8300 cash reporting rules. So there are a couple different ways that cash can be given to you that you have to report it. Very straightforward. If you get over $10,000 worth of either paper money, money order, and the reason they list money orders is because typically money orders are given in $1,000 or $2,000 increments. They're not given in a $10,000 increment. So typically money orders and also traveler's checks. They also list like foreign currency or anything else you can see that's a vehicle for cash that's not reported through another institution. So now it can be a little tricky when you have different forms of cash coming in that are under $10,000 that are vehicles for cash. So some examples of that would be like a cashier's check, a bank draft, as long as it's not tied to the proceeds from a loan, or electronic funds transfers. So let's say, for example, you get a $10,000, $12,000 cashier's check. That cashier's check would be reported by the bank. It's over $10,000, so you don't have to worry about reporting that. But let's say you get a cashier's check for $8,000 and then the customer gives you paper money for $3,000. Now in that situation, since the cashier's check is not reported by the bank, but it's a vehicle for cash, and the two combined are over $10,000, you would need to report that on your 8300 form. Same thing with like if you got an electronic funds transfer for $4,000, you got a bank draft for $4,000, and then you got a cashier's check for another $4,000. None of those would have been reported by another institution, and totaling, they're all over $10,000 and they're all vehicles for cash. The best thing to do, if you're not sure, is report. It's always better to over-report than under-report, but those are some examples of things you want to look out for. So what is not cash? What is specifically not cash? So a personal check is not cash, and like I mentioned before, proceeds from a bank loan is definitely not cash. So those 2 forms, no matter what dollar amount they're in, you don't really have to worry about those. So when do you have to report? Like I said, anything over $10,000, one transaction, you do have to report. You have to report any related transactions. So related transactions are defined as anything within a 24-hour period. An example of that would be customer comes in and buys an ATV for $8,000, and you know that they're going to go over to the service department and spend another $4,000 putting accessories on it. That right there would be a related transaction, and it would be within a 24-hour period, so you would have to report it. Another example of that would be if a customer, say, bought 2 motorcycles and you know that they're related transactions. They come in, they buy one today, they buy one tomorrow. Another example of where you would need to report that may not be obvious is layaway payments. So if you're taking installment payments for a customer, every time they hit $10,000 in a course of a calendar year, you would need to report that on the 8300 form. Another thing you would want to look out for is any kind of suspicious transaction. A very straightforward one that's listed on the IRS website would be if a customer specifically asks about the 8300 form. If a customer ever asks about the 8300 form, kind of as a side note, you never want to directly answer the question of if you are filling it out or not. If you do, you can kind of end up in a position where you can't say yes and you can't say no. Customer comes in and says, hey Steve, if I buy a bike from you and I give you $12,000 in cash, are you going to fill out the 8300 form? If I say yes, and then they turn around and ask me, well, how about if I give you $8,000? That then becomes a suspicious transaction. Now, a suspicious transaction, I cannot tell them I'm going to report. I can't really say yes because you're suspicious, but I also can't say no because then I could be in trouble with the IRS helping the customer structure so that they don't fill out the 8300 form. Best advice I have is just don't answer that question. Just say, you know what, we do whatever's required by the IRS. If we're required to fill out the form, we do. And just kind of leave it at that. All right, that was the first video. We'll go ahead and pull up the next one here. Now there is some timing that you need to make sure you meet. So you have 15 days to fill out the form and send it in. And then you must keep that document for a minimum of 5 years. Most dealerships basically have a file where they keep all their 8300 filings and just keep that stuff for a total of 5 years. Another piece of the 8300 is customer notification. Any customer that you fill out an 8300 form on, you do need to notify them by January 31st of the following year. Now, as I stated a second ago, with suspicious transactions, you do not notify the customer. In fact, you can't tell the customer. There is a box on there that's right underneath the taxpayer ID number that you check off, and then basically you send it into the IRS, don't notify the customer. Now, as far as the taxpayer ID number, and I always get this question when it comes to cash. If I'm getting cash from a customer, why do I need to get their social security number? And is it really required? So the IRS does say that you need to put the taxpayer ID number in there, which would be their social. Now, if the customer either won't give it to you or doesn't have one, there are other numbers that can go in there. So it could be the employer identification number. You can put a passport number in there. You can put driver's license number or state issue ID in that line. So there are a couple other things you can do if the social security number either, they don't have one or they won't give you one. The last thing I want to talk about is the enforcement. Wow, thought I'd give you a quick break from that guy. So there are 4 different ways that dealers get in trouble when it comes to the 8300 form. There's not filing, forgetting to file, not filing a form, a true accident. Usually the way this will work is, let's say that you run the business, they come in, they audit you, and you've done 30 and you should have done 31. So they'll assess a civil penalty. There's also not notifying the customer that you filed, because there is that notification requirement. Also a civil penalty. So, $100, $200, $300, $500, whatever it is. It's a monetary fee based on civil penalties. Then it gets a little more serious. So disregarding the rule. So if they can prove that you intentionally just didn't do it on these transactions right here, then basically the penalty is the amount that should have been reported not to be less than $26,600 or not to be greater than $106,000. So there is a little bit of a window there that they can fine you, and it's all based on how much you should have reported. Now, there's one step more serious than that, and that is if you help a customer structure a deal in order to not report. If in that case you assist the customer in structuring, which if you remember, I had a comment earlier that you never want to answer the question, are you going to fill out an 8300 form as a yes or no question? Because you can get caught in a situation where you're telling the customer you're not going to file it. If that were the IRS, or if you were helping them not file it, what you'd be looking at is a fine of $1,064,000 and possibly 5 years in prison. So you want to make sure and file those 8300 forms and not lead the customer, not discuss it with the customer. Just know when you're supposed to file and file them. If you run into any specific questions you have, the IRS has a really good help section on their website. They give some more examples of what does and does not need to be reported. Again, if you're concerned, better over-report than under-report. Okay, and one last video. Now this one right here is on specifically the customer notification. This is a real quick video, minute and 30 seconds-ish. So go ahead and click on that one. Okay. Okay, so just wanted to take a second and show you guys a sample customer notification letter for the 8300 form. As I said before, you do need to make sure that you send this letter to the customer before January 31st of the following year. So if you reported the cash to the IRS in 2016, you'd need to send this letter to the customer before January 31st of 2017. Of course, you want to put, your letterhead up top. And then the notification to the customer just simply says that we're required to report any cash or cash equivalents over $10,000, and we're required to notify you that we've done that. And this basically is the notification. You want to, of course, include your dealership name, the date, the amount you reported, and then at the bottom here, this information here should be the compliance officer's information. So your name, your title, business address, business phone number. If they have any questions, they can always contact you. Since the federal government does not give an exact sample, this is just a good interpretation of what they want sent out. Now, before you start using this form, always make sure that you run it past your attorney and that this meets the current regulations as your attorney interprets them. All right, so a couple things you may have seen pop up on the video. There was a mention of our textbook, which for our textbook for the compliance training, we use the F&I Legal Desk book, which is put out by Hudson Cook. Hudson Cook are the lead attorneys when it comes to any dealership compliance. They have multiple books. This is the one that we decided to use for the class, and then we added things to it because this really focuses primarily on F&I. We have other partners that we have used for other material also. But if you don't have a copy of this book on hand, I would definitely recommend getting a copy. It's a great textbook, has a lot of, it's basically set up as a question and answer style book. So if you have questions about specific regulations, you can go to this book and use it as your reference guide. The other thing that I threw out there was the IRS website. So I'm going to send you guys a link to this website right here, to this page. And on this page, basically you have all of the information you need to make sure that you are compliant with the 8300 form. So it does give things like, the definitions of cash, what is and is not included in cash, definitions of related transactions, specifically the suspicious transactions, their definition of that. All of the information is also here, so you can reference this moving forward and use this as your guide.